I have a brother, my oldest brother was in the military. He was in the Navy. And I've always been fascinated by military life, by many aspects of military life. But one aspect of military life that I've always been fascinated with, really, is the idea of the chain of command. Now, I know Nick would know all about this, having served in the Army. The chain of command. What's fascinating to me about the chain of command is the level of trust and obedience inherent in the chain of command. It's expected. It's just there. If a superior officer orders one of their subordinates to do something, they have to give that order knowing that the person they're giving that order to is going to be carried out the way that it's supposed to, that it's going to be carried out swiftly as it can, and correctly. They have to trust that that's going to happen. If they don't have that implicit, that inherent trust in the system of the chain of command, the whole thing can fall apart. And we've heard stories about that. We've had movies and TV shows written about that sort of thing where the chain of command falls apart, right? We've had coups in other countries where military have taken it upon themselves, and in fact, even recently in the world, that has happened, where the chain of command stops working the way that it's supposed to. And if it does, everything falls apart. And what fascinates me about this is I have no real frame of reference for this, is that sort of obedience and trust. Because I don't have a frame of reference for it. There is no one for whom I automatically trust that what they're telling me is the absolute thing that I should be doing. Now, you might think that that's a problem with me. Maybe it is. I'm just now coming to realize. Maybe it is. And it's not that I don't trust people around me. It's not that I don't have trustworthy people around me. I consider some of you at least to be very trustworthy. I'll let you decide which ones maybe I don't find so trustworthy. But I honestly can't imagine needing to be in a situation where I'd have to have that level of trust. At least not at this point in my life, I don't. But in a military context, a soldier who doesn't follow the orders of their superior would be court-martialed if they didn't follow that order. They'd be thrown out. It's a serious business and has serious consequences if you don't follow orders. And I think sometimes, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, and maybe you, those of you who weren't in the military like I haven't been, can, at least in some way, understand what I'm saying. I think sometimes, because we don't find ourselves in those situations where we live by the trust and obedience, that structure that we find in the military, it can cause us to think at times, I know it does for me, that the things God wants us to do are more suggestive than they are commands. That maybe what God is saying is, hey, I'd like for you to do this. But if you happen to not follow through, well, that's okay also. Now, this sort of disobedience, I think, comes from an honest, if flawed, and I agree that it's flawed, sense of questioning authority. Because when we question God's authority, we demonstrate a lack of faith. We demonstrate a lack of faith within us that God is actually, God. And that God does have the sort of authority over us that He does. As we're about to read in Luke 7, we're going to read about a military man who demonstrated the kind of faith that I think we sometimes lack. So let's read and see what Jesus does for him and says to him, and then we're going to read about what Jesus did for a widow also. Turn to Luke chapter 7 if you want to follow along. We're going to read verses 1 through 17 together. The word of the Lord from the Gospel of Luke. When Jesus had finished saying all this to the people, he returned to Capernaum. At that time, the highly valued slave of a Roman officer was sick and near death. When the officer heard about Jesus, he sent some respected Jewish elders to ask him to come and heal his slave. So they earnestly begged Jesus to help the man. If anyone deserves your help, he does, they said, for he loves the Jewish people and even built a synagogue for us. So Jesus went with them. But just before they arrived at the house, the officer sent some friends to say, "Lord, don't trouble yourself by coming to my home, for I am not worthy of such an honor. I am not even worthy to come and meet you. Just say the word from where you are, and my servant will be healed. I know this because I am under the authority of my superior officers, and I have authority over my soldiers. I only need to say go, and they go, or come, and they come. And if I say to my slaves, do this, they do it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed. Turning to the crowd that was following him, he said, "I tell you, I haven't seen such faith like this in all Israel." And when the officer's friends returned to his house, they found the slave completely healed. Soon afterward, Jesus went with his disciples to the village of Nain, and a large crowd followed him. A funeral procession was coming out as he approached the village gate. The young man who had died was a widow's only son, and a large crowd from the village was with her. When the crowd from the when the Lord saw her, his heart overflowed with compassion. "Don't cry," he said. Then he walked over to the coffin and touched it, and the bearers stopped. "Young man," he said, "I tell you, get up." Then the dead boy sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. Great fear swept the crowd, and they praised God, saying, "A mighty prophet has risen among us, and God has visited his people today." And the news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding countryside. All right, let's talk about this Jesus the prophet. Let's talk first about the healing of the centurion's servant. We must see, as the Roman centurion did, this Roman officer, that God's authority in Jesus is absolute. We must see that. Anything less is our own lack of faith, not Jesus' lack of authority. The healing of the servant isn't the main focus of the story, even. What is it? The healing portion merely serves as the vehicle to deliver what to us? The faith of the Roman officer. The main takeaway from this story is the faith that we witness in this Roman centurion. The beginning description that we get of him is quite remarkable. Who is sent to persuade Jesus to even come and heal the slave to begin with? The Roman centurion doesn't send his friends to begin with. Who goes for him? Some of the Jewish leaders. Some of the Jewish leaders go and argue on this man's behalf. They go and argue his case for him. But that fact in and of itself is remarkable. So how did they get there? The centurion was clearly a man in charge of other soldiers in the Roman army. But he himself had a commanding officer, right? He even says that. So he was subject to going where he was told, and he was placed in Capernaum, a place that he probably never wanted to be in the first place. He probably had no desire to go there whatsoever. Who wants to go there when you could go just about anywhere else or be sent just about anywhere else? But this is where he was sent, so this is where he found himself. And most likely, the primary objective, his mandate for being in Capernaum, was to keep the peace and provide general policing of the area. Remember, there were no formal police in that day. They didn't have police officers. Military personnel kept the peace in those days. This, in and of itself, would have set him against the Jewish people that he was with. That very fact that he's come there to police them, that he's come there to keep the peace, meaning that you can't do it on your own, I have to be sent here to do it for you, as a conquering people, would have set him against the Jews who lived there. Or at least that's how they would have perceived it. Here comes the Roman military man to tell us what to do. And this sort of animosity built up all over the place. We've seen it through the history of humanity, that when a conquering army comes in to take over a people, eventually that people that were conquered begin to rise up, begin to throw off their oppressors. And yet this man became so beloved in this town that the Jewish leaders who were there went and argued his case for him to Jesus. The sort of animosity that I'm talking about can build and it bubbles over into violence, but not in Capernaum. What happened instead? Instead of the centurion growing frustrated by the people, instead of the people growing hateful of this military oppressor who has his thumb upon them, they got along. They actually got along. They got along so much that the centurion fell in love with the people. That's how they describe him. A man who loves us. Fell in love with the people. He began to see them as people that he can get along with instead of people who need to be ruled, instead of people who need to be put under his thumb. And he went so far as to build them a house of worship, which would have been contrary to his directive as a military Roman official to worship only one God, and that is Caesar. He built a house of worship for the Jews in Capernaum. A remarkable man, right? And so after Jesus decided to go help, the centurion sent more people to Jesus to tell him not to come any closer. The centurion realizes his unworthiness to even host such an amazing guest inside his home. And this Roman official recognizes Jesus' authority. As he expects for people to do what he tells them to do, as he expects for people to go and to come when he says go and come, as he expects his soldiers to follow precisely the letter of what he's told them to do, otherwise the whole structure falls apart, he recognizes Jesus' authority. Not over telling people when to go and to come, but over what? Over what does he recognize Jesus' authority? Over sickness, over illness, over disease. It's a very different sort of authority and command that Jesus has, but he recognizes it in Jesus. And he actually expects that if Jesus says from where he is, the illness will leave your servant, that will happen. It's an amazing testament to the Roman centurion's faith. What's even more amazing to me is that Jesus himself is amazed by what happens. That ought to tell you something. That ought to perk your ears up. If Jesus gets amazed, oh boy, I better pay attention to what's happening right now. In the Gospels, it's usually Jesus who does the amazing things, not other people amazing Jesus. Rarely does he amaze himself, I would imagine. But even here, Jesus himself is amazed by the centurion's faith. Because he knows that if Jesus declares his servant clean, his sickness clean, and he will be. What a fantastic, amazing demonstration of faith. To believe that he can approach God and know beyond a doubt that God is able to deliver. Not that God has to. That point needs to be made as well. Not that God has to. Notice, the centurion never says, and if you don't do what I want you to do, well, then you're really not all that amazing at all, Jesus. You can't be God unless you heal my servant. We never get that description from the Roman centurion. Instead, he acknowledges God's authority. He acknowledges God's authority. He demonstrates his faith in doing so. And he steps back to let God work how he wills in this world. There's a lot we can learn from a Roman centurion about the kind of faith that we should have. Let's talk about this widow's son. The truth is, death is all too common. Some of you have experienced that this past year. Family members, friends, loved ones. And it's been even more common over the past year as hundreds of thousands have died during this pandemic from a deadly virus. We're all still living through it. And it's tough. Death has been all too common in our world as of late. And as I read the story of the raising of this widow's son over the past couple weeks, I was reminded that death is constantly a part of life. It never stops, and it never gets any easier to deal with. We may learn to cope in different ways with the fact that death is a part of life, but it doesn't actually ever get any easier. And I thought about the woman whose son is dead before her. And unlike the story we just talked about with the Roman official, a story of healing, a story that's dependent upon the faith that we see in the Roman official, this story and the raising from the dead actually doesn't depend upon faith at all, at least not of somebody else. Maybe you could say it depends upon Jesus' faith to raise the dead boy, but we don't see the faith of his mother. We don't see the faith of those family members who might be traveling along with the boy as he's being carried to burial. At least outside of Jesus' own faith, we don't see a hint of it in this story. Though Jesus often works in conjunction and direct connection with someone else's faith, there are moments in Scripture where he simply acts by his desire to see good done. This is one of those moments. I wonder if it was because he saw the mother mourning along with her family and friends. Did he hear her cries and respond out of sadness for her? Did he look at a boy taken too young in life and think, he has more to offer this world than he already has? Was Jesus moved by his life, by the boy's life cut too short? We can ask Jesus one day, and I plan to. But for now, we'll just have to be satisfied with the fact that Jesus didn't want to wait around to gauge the faith of the mother and the friends and the family members who are mourning. In this moment, he wanted to and so chose to act. And I want to draw your attention once again to what I think makes Jesus so remarkable among his peers. He doesn't just speak the words for the boy to get up, which he could have easily done from very far away. Right? He could have stood as far away as he wanted and told the boy, get up. In fact, that's the very lesson we see in the story before. That he can be wherever he wants to be, and when Jesus says something needs to happen, it's going to happen. That's the chain of command for Jesus. What does he do instead? He walked over to the coffin, to the stretcher, whatever the boy was laying upon. And he touched it. He walked over to the coffin and he actually touched it. An act that would have made Jesus unclean in that moment. Because it's not just that you don't touch dead people, it's that you don't touch dead people and the things that they're laying upon, the things that they touch. That also makes you unclean. Yet, here Jesus goes again, throwing caution to the wind, setting aside all the things that he's not supposed to do the thing that needs doing, the thing that he wants to do, because he knows the people it will help. And so after the boy gets up, Because Jesus also speaks the words, hey, get up. It's time to get up. There's obvious commotion afterward, right? I mean, there would have to be commotion afterward. The people can't believe their eyes, their ears. They can't trust any sense that they have in that moment. They're clearly ecstatic. I imagine they were torn between looking at the boy who just came back to life and looking at the man who apparently has the power to bring a boy back to life. I imagine their eyes were just going back and forth between the two. What an amazing moment for them to witness. And it's all done by Jesus' faith and by his authority, not by the faith of the mother. I want to end by looking at the words the people speak after the miracle Jesus performs. They say a couple of things. First, they exclaim, "A great or mighty prophet is among us." As I told you before, this chapter clearly paints Jesus as a prophet. A prophet in the vein of Elijah and Elisha, who travel the countryside, who travel Israel, performing great miracles to demonstrate God's love for his people. Jesus does the same thing. We've been talking about this on Wednesday night. It's not just the things that Jesus says. It's the fact that he backs those statements up with things that corroborate his authority, with things that clearly demonstrate that he has authority in this world, that he has authority to make sickness go away, that he has authority to bring somebody back from the dead. Those things demonstrate to us and to the people that he was with that what he's saying is true. That when he calls himself, I am, that he means it. That he means it. Clearly they recognize that what Jesus does here and elsewhere demonstrates that he is a prophet, just like Elijah and Elisha. But it's what they say after this that really struck me this time reading it through. What else they say to him is that God has visited, or perhaps come to help, other translations put it, his people. God has visited his people. This man is not just a prophet. A great prophet has come among us. But even more so, God has visited his people. And I wonder, did they truly appreciate what they were saying? Did they truly understand and recognize just how right they were? Because it's one thing to say it about a prophet, that God has visited us through this prophet, which we could even say now. You know what? A friend came over and comforted me the other day. God visited me through that person. That's one way of saying it, right? But do they understand the deeper meaning that they're giving here? That God himself, Emmanuel, visited me, visited us today. Emmanuel, God with us. God has visited us today. Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. He has come to help us. It's the truth about Jesus that we all know, that we all already know about him, but which the people in this story are finding out for the first time. And I think that we too often forget, and too easily forget, that God is with us through Jesus. The miracle of raising the widow's son is amazing. I mean, it's out of this world. Amazing. It's outstanding, but it's all because God came to visit us. It's all because Jesus is Emmanuel. It's only because God chose to walk among us. It's because of Jesus. Luke is telling us who this man is. He's describing God with us. And it's amazing, amazing to read about. A couple of things to take away from these two stories. First is, do you have faith like the Roman soldier? Do you trust and obey God that much that you truly believe that He can do everything He says He can do? But do you also have the faith, like the Roman centurion, that if God doesn't do what you want Him to, that He is still God, no matter what? Do we have faith like the Roman soldier did? And then the second thing, how might the truth that God has come to help us, come to visit us, bring you comfort right now in your life? Does that message bring you any comfort? How does it bring you comfort to know that God has come to visit you? Now, I don't expect Jesus to walk through that door. I doubt any of you do as well. But God has come to us in a different way, through the Spirit. Through the Spirit coming into our lives, inhabiting, indwelling within us. God has taken up residence in His people. Does that bring you comfort? It does me. Does it bring you comfort? That's the good news of Luke chapter 7, or at least that part of Luke chapter 7. As we transition into our family time now, you may have needs that you want to let us know about. We are a family. We want to take care of each other. We want to pray for each other. We want to celebrate together. Maybe there's something that you want to share with us that you can't wait. There's just something so good in your life that you got to let us know about it. That's what this time is for. Maybe it's a prayer need that you have, somebody in your family or you yourself have something going on that you want to let us know about. That's why we have this time. So we can laugh, cry, celebrate, be sad together as a family. So whatever needs you may have, we want you to let us know about them. Come forward as we stand and sing.